Thank you for joining me for another Sunday Afternoons with Reverend Lucretia. And if this is your first time coming to the channel, welcome. I'm so glad that you found us. So the name of today's talk is You Too Can Walk on Water During the Storm. And the song is Keep Your Eye on the Prize by Seeger. If you'd like to listen to the song before you hear the talk, just go ahead and click. The link will be down below in the description. And so we're going to be talking about keeping your eye on the prize. And for me, that means staying in constant contact with God, being able to hear his voice, being able to feel his presence, knowing that there is not a single moment in time that he is not standing right there beside me. So we're going to be talking about the biblical story of Peter and how he too walked on the water, but he almost fell when he took his eyes off of God. We're going to be talking about the metaphysical interpretation of fear and faith and Peter, and how our choices and where we put our attention are always ours to choose. We're going to be talking also about our need to ask for help and the fact that it will always be answered whenever we ask for help. And that will show up in the two stories that we're going to have, the biblical story of Peter as well as this incredible hero story that I've got. So the hero story is about someone named Ingrid Betancourt. She was a Colombian politician, and she has an incredible story about being a hostage. So her story is called What 6 Years in Captivity Taught Me About Fear and Faith. She was a Colombian politician. She was a former senator. She was an anti-corruption activist. She was kidnapped by FARC, and she was held as a hostage in the jungle for over 6 years. There was a documentary called Hostage in the Jungle, and there are several books that she wrote about it as well. So she was campaigning actually for the presidential seat under the Green Party when she was abducted. So she was 41 years old. She said it was the first time that she actually felt fear. She had gotten into politics because she wanted to cut off the ties between the politicians and the drug traffickers. She called out several politicians, including the president. She had several death threats made on her life. So she sent her young children away out of the country in an armored car. She was attacked several times, but she was not harmed. A year after her first attacks, she actually won the election for senator. And then a couple of years after that, she decided to run in the presidential election. So while she was campaigning for that, she was detained by a group of armed men, and it turned out that they were FARC guerrillas. So the car stopped. It had gone over a landmine. The person that was sitting next to her into the car actually blew up and fell back down right next to her. And she knew she was going to die. And the only thought she said is, they're going to kill me, and I didn't say goodbye to my children. So they took her into the deepest part of the jungle, and they announced that if the government wouldn't negotiate, they were going to kill her. And she said she knew that they were going to kill her because she knew that the government wouldn't do that. So every night she had fear, cold sweats, shaking, insomnia. She felt like her memory was being erased. She was forgetting names and addresses and phone numbers. She felt like she was beginning to doubt her mental health. She was filled with desperation and paranoia and distrust, and a hatred and an urge to kill started to be inside of her. At one particular point, she was chained by the neck to a tree outside, and it was during a tropical storm, and she was humiliated by a guard. She needed to use the bathroom, and he said, anything that you need to do right here in front of me. And she said she was overwhelmed, and she decided that she was going to kill him. She said that was all she could think about for days and nights and weeks on end. That's all she could think about. She was filled with hatred and fear and a desire to kill. And she said, and then one day I rose up and snapped out of it. She said, I'm not going to become one of them. I'm not going to become an assassin. I still have enough freedom to decide who I want to be. That's when I learned that fear brought me face to face with myself. It forced me to align my energies, to align my meridians. I learned that facing fear could become a pathway to growth. So she said there are 3 steps that she took. The first was to be guided by principles. I realized in the midst of panic and mental block, if I followed my principles, I would act correctly. So the concentration camp that she was in the jungle had 12-foot tall fences around it with barbed wires and armed guards 24 hours a day pointing guns at them. The first morning that she was in captivity, the commander came in and started shouting, "Count out." Everybody was asleep, and so they woke off to this immense amount of noise and screaming and yelling and commotion. And he said, count off to give me your numbers to begin to identify themselves in numbered sequence. And she said when her turn came, she said, my name is Ingrid Betancourt. If you want to know if I'm here, call me by my name. She said the guards' fury was nothing compared to the fury of the other hostages who were there, because they thought they were all going to be killed because she was so loud and insensitive to all of their needs. Beyond the fear was the need to defend my identity, she said, not to let them turn me into a thing or a number. That was one of the principles, to defend what I considered human dignity. So the guards had it all figured out, she said. They'd been having hostages for years. They'd kidnapped for a very long time, and they had developed these techniques for how to break them. The second step, she said, was to learn how to build supportive trust and learn how to unite the hostages together with each other. She said being in the jungle was like being on another planet. There were shadows, rain, there was the hum of millions of bugs, bullet ants. She said she didn't stop scratching one single day for the entire time she was there. There were tarantulas, scorpions, anacondas. She said she came face to face with a 24-foot anaconda. There were jaguars. She said none of these did as much harm as the human beings who terrorized us, who spread rumors among the hostages, who sparked betrayals, jealousy, and mistrust. So the third step, she said, for her to be able to keep her sanity was the most important gift I want to give to you, and that is to learn how to develop faith. So she actually escaped 6 different times, but she was caught every time. And she did help several other people to escape. There was one person in particular that she had to work with for months, because one of the ways to escape was by going into the water, and this man didn't even know how to swim. So she had to teach him how to swim before she would be able to teach him to escape. And so they had to do all this in secrecy, and it went on for months and months and months. And finally he was ready to swim and to try to do the escape. And he said, what if I walk around in circles, and after I get through the water and I get to the other side of the jungle and I can't find my way out? And she said, pick up the phone and call the man upstairs. And he said, I don't believe in God. You know that. Why would you say something like that to me? And she said, God doesn't care. He will still help you. So the next day there was this big commotion, and they were screaming over the loudspeakers that he had escaped. And they told him that they had found his remains, that he had been eaten by an anaconda. 17 days passed. She said she counted every single one of them. And then on the radio, she heard Pincho's voice, that he was free and alive. And he said on the radio, I know my fellow hostages are listening. Ingrid, I did what you told me. I called the man upstairs, and he sent me the patrol that rescued me from the jungle. She said this is one of the most extraordinary moments of her captivity, because she realized fear is contagious, but so is faith. Faith isn't rational or emotion. Faith is an exercise of the will. It's the discipline of the will. And we're going to be talking more about that discipline a little bit later on. It's what allows us to transform everything that we are, our weaknesses, our frailties, into strength, into powers. It's truly a transformation. It's what gives us the strength to stand up in the face of fear, look above it and see beyond it. I know we all need to connect with that strength we have inside us for the time when there's a storm raging around our boat. And we're going to be talking about the storm raging around the boat when we talk about Peter. So she says the day came when they took us all handcuffed to go onto a helicopter, and they were being rescued. She said everything happened as quickly as when they had kidnapped me. 1 minute I saw the guerrilla commander at my feet, and the next minute he was gagged, and the rescue leader yelled, "We are the army of Columbia. You are free." The shriek that came out of us still continues to vibrate within me. They can divide us, they can manipulate us with fear. We all feel fear, but we all avoid being recruited by hatred by using the resources we have, our principles, our unity, and our faith. Fear is a part of the human condition necessary for survival, but above all, it's the guide by which each of us builds our identity and our personality. It was my decision what to do with the fear. You can survive crawling along, fearful, but you can also rise above the fear, rise up, spread your wings, and soar, fly high, high, until you reach the stars, where all of us want to go. I just thought that was such an amazing story. So we are going to talk about the Peter story. We're going to talk about the metaphysical interpretation. He also was in a boat. But let me go ahead and just read to you straight from the Bible. This is the English Standard Version of it, and it's Matthew 14:22 through 33. So it's Jesus immediately made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But the boat by this time was a long way from the land, beaten by waves, for the wind was against them. And on the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. They were terrified and said, "It's a ghost," and they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." And Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And he said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, "Oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." So Peter had faith. He acknowledged Jesus' power all along. He wanted to share in the act of Jesus. So Jesus had walked on the water, and he wanted to try to do it too. He was the closest person to Jesus. So figuratively, walking on water means to perform an impossible or godlike task. And what we're talking about is that this is a learning process. Peter represents the learning process that we go to when we start off not having very big faith and having just fear, and moving into a place where faith is with us all of the time. Each step that Peter took was a trial of his faith towards Jesus and farther from his accustomed means of survival. So the normal way that you move along the waters in the boat. So he was walking farther and farther away from the normal, what he knew, into this far off place of faith where he was with Jesus. So this all happened after the feeding of the 5,000, that Jesus boarded the ship and told them to go to Galilee, and he remained behind and sent away the multitude to pray. So Jesus came to them, and they were all scared. And what happened was Peter's attention was diverted. His faith was weakened, and he began to sink. And after he became afraid, he didn't fall, but he started to fall, and then he cried out, "Lord, save me." And then at that time, Jesus reached out for Peter's hand and brought him onto safety. And you need to notice that Peter was brought onto the boat before Jesus got on the boat. So Jesus clasped his hand, brought him onto the boat, put him safely on the boat, and then Jesus got on the boat and he said, "Why did you doubt me?" So if we are truly to live in faith, we must not rely on what we are seeing externally. In moments of confusion, fear overpowers the faith, and Peter and all of us can start to fall. So we must reach out in faith and not rely on the external forces. It's like learning to ride a bike. So when you learn how to ride a bike, you put training wheels on so that when you start to get a little bit wobbly and you feel like you're going to go one direction or the other, you've got the training wheels to keep you balanced. But at some point you have to take the training wheels off so that you don't fall. So this whole story about Peter is how he goes through these different stages of having faith and then going into fear and then going back into faith. And he represents all of us and how we have times where we're not so solid in our faith. Even though we really want to be, we're not so solid. So remember that Jesus didn't ask, "Why are you afraid?" He asks, "Why did you doubt me?" When you take your eyes off of God, the good, the omnipresent, and focus instead on what's happening around us, we lose our focus and we have fear and not faith. Sometimes we take our eyes off of God because we think we've got it all figured out ourselves. So our pride, our ego, our edging God out thing takes over, and we think we don't need God, and that's when we lose our faith and we become more fearful. Sometimes we are so overwhelmed we literally can't think straight. So I've talked about these brain studies that have been done over and over again, that when you go into the fight or flight place in your brain, the part of your brain that does problem solving actually shuts down. So a lot of times what happens is we go into this fear place because we literally can't think straight. And so that's why it's so important that we stay strong in our faith place and not go into the fear place. Ask yourself, what is distracting you so much that you forget that God is in charge? What causes you to forget that there are lessons in all of life's experiences, the good and the bad? So Peter, metaphysically, is the spiritual faculty of faith. So before he was called Peter, he was called Simon, and Simon signifies hearing and receptivity and the ability to discern the truth. But Jesus changed his name to Peter, or Cephas, which is the Greek word for rock. This represents faith in God, strong, unwavering, and enduring. Faith is the necessary foundation for the building up of our spiritual consciousness, the church of Christ that lives inside of us, inside each individual. So Peter was one of the first disciples that Jesus called. Faith is one of the first spiritual faculties that is brought into expression. The leading characteristic of Peter is faith. But before it's firmly established in spiritual consciousness, there is changeableness. There is a state of unsteadiness, Charles Fillmore says, and he fluctuates between high spiritual place and the material plane, where he is receiving desire for the things of the spirit versus desire for things of the material world. Peter is wavering. He is denying one in reality, and his faith is questioned. When his faith works through the intellect, Charles Fillmore says, it is subject to the winds and the waves of sense thought. So if you're thinking through your brain, if you're trying to have faith through your thoughts, it's going to be unstable. If you have faith through your heart, right, because love is where God is. Love is the primary force. So when you are coming from your heart, your faith is going to be strong. So Simon, the hearing part, is the spiritual receptivity of the mind, and Peter, the stone, the rock, is the ability of the mind to establish ideas in consciousness. So faith is the central faculty in the consciousness of a master. Jesus said upon it he would build his church. So Charles Fillmore says, to walk on water of the troubled thought without sinking requires the established faith of Jesus in the saving power of the Spirit, God. Peter represents faith in the various stages of development. Until faith is thoroughly identified with Christ, the Peter faculty is not stable. We have to affirm its allegiance to Spirit, God, in hour of our adversity. To deny it, we ever know the Spirit. So deny that ability to stay focused on God, we will be able to be living in faith and not in fear. When you train yourself to see the Christ, the God, in all things, under all circumstances, your faith becomes stronger. So you cannot do what God wants you to do without disciplining your powers. The thinking faculty is the first priority. So Charles Fillmore talks a whole lot about the fact that we have to train our minds to be able to stay focused, that by themselves they won't automatically stay focused. He says our minds are the inlet and outlet of all your ideas. It is always active, zealous, impulsive, but not always wise. If you stand meekly by and let it think unsifted thoughts, your thinking will prove an unruly servant and produce all sorts of discord. Peter's walking upon the water represents the human consciousness when it takes its eyes off its spiritual center and forgets the Christ power within each one of us. We begin to doubt when we do not keep our eyes steadily on the cause. We are lost in the winds and the waves of appearances. So here's what I know. I wrote this because I have several friends who are hurting really deeply emotionally right now. And over the past couple of weeks, as you know, I've gone through some emotional struggles of my own. And I wanted to address how do we get through these really difficult times. And as I was thinking about it and praying and meditating, the Peter story came to me because it's such a perfect example of the fact that when you keep your eyes on the prize, you win. But if you're like Peter and you take your eyes off of God, even for one moment, that's when you start to sink. You need to understand, Peter didn't actually ever sink. It's just he took his eyes off and he began to sink, and then he called out and asked for help, and he was helped and he was saved. So the story of Peter came to me as a perfect example of two things. Number one, when you take your eyes off the prize, we fall. And number two, the need to ask for help. So always remember what the priority is, to stay as completely as possible in conscious contact with God. When that is the priority, all the externals are put in a different perspective. It's not to say that horrible things are not going to happen and that it don't matter. It's that we are going to get through them if we stay in constant contact with God, who will always give us the direction on what the next right steps are. Our priority is to be able to hear God's voice. Sometimes all we can do is to turn the situation over to God and let that power do the work. After we have taken all the actions we can to resolve whatever the problem is, the next thing is to let go. So the second thing to do is to ask for help. In the hero story, she says, pick up the phone and call the man upstairs. And in the Peter story, he cries out, Lord, save me. For me, it's about accepting where I have the power and, as importantly, where I need to give the problem to God. Keeping the eye on the prize reminds me that keeping my priority on God will bring me the gifts that I am really looking for. The prize ultimately is the peace that passes all understanding. The knowing beyond all other knowing that God is with me, inside me, outside me, and all around me. The prize is the confidence that this too shall pass. And the knowing that in all circumstances, no matter how difficult, God is right there in the middle of it. And, as is stated in the song, Paul and Silas, bound in jail, had no money for the bail. Keep your eyes on the prize. Hold on, hold on. The very moment I thought I was lost, the dungeon shook and the chains fell off. Keep your eyes on the prize. Hold on, hold on. As you go through trials and tribulations this week, remember those words. Peace that surpasses all understanding is always ours when we claim it, and if we make a decision to keep our eyes on the prize. And so it is. Remember, at all times the power's in you. It always has been, and it always will be. So I look forward to hearing from you. What is it that throws you off your game? What is it that puts you in fear? What is it that distracts you so much that you forget that God is in charge of every single moment of every single day? I look forward to hearing from you, and I send you on your way in many blessings.